The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was drinking coffee at my kitchen table in Minneapolis, watching snow pile up against the window. I'm 43, work as an accountant for a mid-sized insurance firm, and I thought I'd seen every kind of financial mess there was. But nothing prepared me for the subject line. Emergency. Need to talk about Sarah's situation ASAP. Mom never used caps lock unless someone was dying. I opened it with shaking hands, already knowing this wouldn't be good news. Sarah, my younger sister by 5 years, had been radio silent for months. The last I'd heard, she was living in Phoenix, working at some startup that was supposed to make her rich. The email was short but loaded with panic. Sarah was in trouble. Big trouble. And somehow, according to Mom, it was now my problem to fix. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth as I read the dollar amount. $74,500. I called Mom immediately, my fingers fumbling with the phone. The conversation started with her usual guilt tactics, but this time there was real desperation in her voice. Sarah had co-signed for some business loan with a boyfriend who disappeared. The company went under, creditors were calling, and Sarah was on the hook for the full amount. Mom explained it like she was reading from a script, probably one Sarah had fed her. The family needed to come together. Blood was thicker than water. I was the responsible one, the one with a steady job and good credit. Surely I could help my own sister. But here's what Mom didn't say in that first call. This wasn't Sarah's first financial disaster. There'd been the credit card debt when she was 25. The car loan she defaulted on at 30. The rent money I'd sent her 3 times in the past decade. Each time, it was supposed to be the last time. I drove out to see Mom that weekend, taking the familiar route through the suburbs where I grew up. The house looked smaller than I remembered, paint peeling on the shutters, lawn yellowed from winter. Mom met me at the door with red-rimmed eyes and immediately launched into Sarah's sob story. We sat in the living room where I'd done homework as a kid, surrounded by family photos that now felt like evidence of a lie. Mom pulled out bank statements, loan documents, printouts of threatening emails from creditors. Sarah had been living beyond her means for years, funding a lifestyle with borrowed money and false promises. The most painful part wasn't the money. It was realizing that my mother, the woman who'd taught me right from wrong, was asking me to enable my sister's destruction. She wanted me to take out a loan against my house, drain my retirement savings, sacrifice my own financial security for Sarah's mistakes. I told her I needed time to think. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times I'd bailed Sarah out before, all the promises she'd made to get her life together. I thought about my own struggles, the years I'd worked 2 jobs to pay off student loans, the sacrifices I'd made to build something stable. By morning, I made my decision. I called Mom and told her I wouldn't be taking on Sarah's debt. I offered to help Sarah find a bankruptcy attorney, maybe chip in a few hundred for legal fees, but I wasn't signing my name to her mistakes. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Mom started crying. Not the soft tears of disappointment, but the harsh, choking sobs of someone whose world was falling apart. She told me I was selfish, that family meant nothing to me, that I was abandoning my sister when she needed me most. It was the first time my mother had ever called me selfish. It wouldn't be the last. The campaign started the next day. Mom called every morning and every night, each conversation a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She starts soft, reminiscing about when Sarah and I were kids, how close we used to be. Then she'd pivot to guilt, reminding me of all the things the family had done for me over the years. When guilt didn't work, she moved to threats. Maybe it was time to revise the will. Maybe she'd been wrong about which daughter really cared about family. Maybe I should think about what kind of person I was becoming. My brother Mike called from Denver, clearly coached by Mom. My Aunt Linda from Duluth left voicemails about family loyalty. Even my cousin Jennifer, who I barely knew, sent me a Facebook message about how disappointed Grandma would be if she were alive to see this. They'd weaponized the entire family against me, and I was starting to crack under the pressure. Sarah finally called me directly on a Thursday evening. Her voice was different than I remembered, harder somehow, like she'd been practicing what to say. She didn't start with an apology or even acknowledge the years of financial chaos she'd left in her wake. Instead, she launched into a speech about sibling bonds and shared responsibility. She painted herself as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. The boyfriend had lied to her. The business partners had betrayed her. The economy had shifted. None of it was really her fault, and now she needed her big sister to step up and prove that family mattered. But I could hear something else in her voice, something that made my skin crawl. She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding it. Like I owed her this money. like my financial stability was somehow unfair while she struggled. When I told her no, she hung up on me. The next phase was character assassination. Suddenly, every family gathering I'd missed, every birthday card that was a day late, every time I'd chosen work over family became evidence of my selfishness. Stories got twisted, memories got rewritten, and I became the villain in a narrative I didn't recognize. Mom called my office, sobbing to my secretary about her ungrateful daughter. Sarah posted cryptic Facebook statuses about learning who your real family is during hard times. Mike sent me long emails about responsibility and what Dad would have thought if he were still alive. The worst part was how they made me doubt myself. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I should liquidate my retirement account. Maybe a good sister would have already written the check and not thought twice about it. But then I'd look at my bank statements, at the life I'd built through careful planning and hard work, and I'd remember why I'd said no in the first place. I tried to compromise. I offered to pay for Sarah to attend financial counseling. I suggested she move back to Minneapolis where the cost of living was lower. I even offered to let her stay in my spare bedroom while she got back on her feet. But none of that was good enough. They didn't want solutions. They wanted my money. Sarah needed to maintain her lifestyle in Phoenix. She couldn't possibly move back to the Midwest. Counseling was for people who'd made mistakes, and she was just unlucky. The rejection of my alternatives revealed the truth. This wasn't about helping Sarah. This was about enabling her to continue making the same destructive choices without consequences. They wanted me to fund her dysfunction. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a family crisis. I was dealing with a family scam. Winter dragged on, and so did the pressure campaign. Mom stopped calling me by name, referring to me only as your sister when talking to Sarah, as if I'd ceased to exist as an individual. The extended family picked sides, and most of them chose Sarah. Blood was thicker than water, but apparently debt was thicker than blood. I started dreading the phone ringing. I stopped checking Facebook. I avoided the grocery store where Mom shopped and the restaurant where Mike's ex-wife worked. My hometown had become a minefield of guilt and accusation. My friends noticed the change. Linda from work asked if I was okay, mentioned that I seemed distracted lately. My neighbor Tom commented that I looked tired when he saw me shoveling snow. But how do you explain that your family is holding you hostage over money you don't owe? I felt isolated and crazy, like I was the only one who could see that what they were asking was wrong. Spring came early that year, and with it, escalation. Sarah sent me copies of foreclosure notices and bankruptcy papers, as if seeing her consequences in writing would change my mind. Mom forwarded emails from creditors, each one CC'd to me like I was already responsible for the debt. Then came the medical scare. Mom called to tell me about chest pains, how the stress of Sarah's situation was affecting her health. Maybe if I could just see my way clear to helping, her blood pressure would stabilize. Maybe her heart could handle the worry if she knew her daughters were looking out for each other. It was emotional blackmail, pure and simple. But it was also effective. I found myself researching second mortgages, calculating how much equity I could pull out of my house. I made appointments with loan officers, telling myself I was just exploring options. The relief I felt when the first bank said no should have been my wake-up call. I was getting ready for work on a Monday morning when my phone buzzed with a security alert from my bank. Someone had attempted to access my online account from an IP address in Arizona. 2 failed login attempts, then a third that triggered the security lockdown. My blood went cold. Phoenix. Sarah was in Phoenix. I called the bank immediately, changed all my passwords, enabled 2-factor authentication on everything. The customer service representative was sympathetic but clear. Someone had tried to guess their way into my account using personal information. Birth dates, addresses, pets' names. The kind of information family members would know. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, hands shaking as I processed what had happened. My sister had literally tried to steal from me. Not borrow, not ask, steal. She'd attempted to hack into my account and take money that wasn't hers. That was my breaking point. I drove straight to Mom's house, security alerts still burning on my phone screen. She answered the door in her bathrobe, looking confused and fragile in the morning light. But when I showed her the bank alerts, when I explained what Sarah had tried to do, her confusion melted into defensive anger. She claimed Sarah was desperate, that people do desperate things when they're cornered. She said I was paranoid, that there could be any number of explanations for what happened. Maybe it was identity theft. Maybe it was Sarah's ex-boyfriend. Maybe the bank made a mistake. But I could see it in her eyes. She knew. She might have even helped, given Sarah old addresses and maiden names to try. The woman who taught me not to take things that didn't belong to me was now making excuses for attempted theft. I told her I was done. No more calls, no more guilt trips, no more family meetings about Sarah's debt. I was changing my phone number and taking steps to protect my financial information. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within hours of leaving Mom's house, my phone exploded with messages. Sarah called me a heartless bitch. Mike accused me of destroying the family over money. Mom sent a text saying she was ashamed to call me her daughter. But the most revealing response came from Sarah herself. In a voice message that I saved from my lawyer, she admitted that she tried to access my account. She claimed it was just to see how much money I had, to prove to the family that I could afford to help her. She made it sound like I was being tested, like my bank balance was somehow public information that the family deserved to know. The entitlement was breathtaking. She'd attempted to commit a felony against me, and she was mad that I'd caught her. I blocked every family member's number and started the process of legally protecting myself from any future attempts at financial manipulation. Cutting contact with my entire family felt like amputating a limb. These were people who'd been part of my daily life for over 4 decades. Mom had called me every Sunday for years. Mike and I had season tickets to the Vikings together. Sarah and I had shared inside jokes and childhood memories that no one else would understand. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. My phone stopped buzzing with guilt and manipulation. I could go to bed without dreading the morning's emotional assault. I could focus on work without wondering what financial crisis would hit my inbox next. The loneliness was real, but so was the relief. I started to remember who I was before I became the family ATM, before every conversation revolved around Sarah's latest disaster. I threw myself into work that spring, taking on extra projects and staying late to avoid the empty evenings at home. My boss noticed the increased productivity and suggested I consider applying for a management position that was opening up. The promotion would mean more money, better benefits, and validation that I was good at something besides enabling dysfunction. My coworkers became my social circle by default. Linda invited me to her book club. Tom from IT asked if I wanted to join his hiking group. These were people who knew me as a competent professional, not as someone who owed her sister money she'd never borrowed. Slowly, I started to rebuild my identity outside of my family's expectations. I was more than Sarah's responsible sister or Mom's reliable daughter. I was a person with my own goals, my own life, my own right to financial security. Summer brought unexpected revelations. A mutual friend from high school reached out, someone who'd stayed in touch with Sarah on social media. Apparently, Sarah had been posting photos from expensive restaurants and weekend trips to Las Vegas, even while claiming to be broke. The desperate, financially ruined sister was somehow still funding a lifestyle that I couldn't afford on my stable salary. More pieces of the puzzle came together through careful online investigation. Sarah's boyfriend hadn't disappeared. They'd broken up months earlier. The business loan wasn't for a startup. It was for a luxury car that had been repossessed. The $74,500 wasn't one debt, but a collection of credit cards, personal loans, and unpaid bills that Sarah had been juggling for years. Everything they'd told me was a lie, carefully crafted to make me feel responsible for problems I hadn't created. I started therapy that July, partly to deal with the grief of losing my family and partly to understand how I'd been manipulated so effectively. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, helped me see the patterns that had been invisible when I was trapped inside them. She explained how family scapegoating works, how dysfunctional families often designate one member as the responsible one, the fixer, the person who's expected to solve everyone else's problems. I'd been groomed for this role since childhood, praised for being mature and reliable, while Sarah was excused for being creative and free-spirited. The therapy sessions were painful but necessary. I had to confront years of conditioning that told me my worth was tied to my usefulness to others. I had to learn that saying no to unreasonable demands wasn't selfish. It was self-preservation. Fall arrived with a job promotion and a raise that felt like vindication. I was making more money than ever, building a retirement fund, planning a vacation to Europe. Everything I protected by refusing to enable Sarah's debt was paying dividends in my own life. But success felt hollow without family to share it with. I wanted to call Mom and tell her about the promotion. I wanted to send Mike photos from my planned trip to Ireland. I wanted Sarah to be proud of her big sister's accomplishments. Instead, I celebrated alone, toasting my new position with a glass of wine in my empty living room. The silence was both peaceful and heartbreaking. The holidays were the hardest part. Thanksgiving and Christmas had always been family affairs, chaotic gatherings where mom cooked too much food and we argued about politics and football. Now I face the prospect of spending them alone, exiled from traditions that went back decades. I volunteered at a soup kitchen on Thanksgiving, serving meals to people who understood what it meant to be without family support. Their gratitude was genuine, unmarked by the manipulation and guilt I'd grown used to. For the first time in months, I felt useful without feeling used. Christmas was quieter. I bought myself the expensive coat I'd been wanting for 3 years, the one I'd never splurged on because I was always worried about having money available for the next family crisis. It fit perfectly and made me feel like the successful professional I'd worked so hard to become. New Year brought unexpected contact. A letter arrived in my mailbox, forwarded from my old address. Sarah's handwriting, shaky and desperate. She was in rehab now, she claimed, finally getting the help she needed. She wanted to apologize for everything, to make amends, to rebuild our relationship. But buried in the apology was another ask. The rehab program was expensive. Her insurance didn't cover everything. She'd learned so much about herself, and she knew now that all her problems stemmed from untreated addiction. If I could just help with the treatment costs, she'd pay me back once she got her life together. I read the letter twice, looking for genuine remorse or accountability. Instead, I found the same manipulation wrapped in therapy speak. Sarah was still Sarah, just with better vocabulary for her cons. I threw the letter away without responding. Spring cleaning became literal and metaphorical that year. I sorted through boxes of family photos, old letters, birthday cards with loving messages from people who turned on me the moment I stopped being useful. Each item was a memory, but also evidence of relationships that had been conditional all along. I kept a few photos from childhood, back when love felt simple and unconditional. The rest went into donation bags or the trash. I wasn't erasing my history, but I was choosing which parts of it deserved space in my future. My therapist called it healthy detachment. I called it spring cleaning for the soul. A year had passed since the bank incident when I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was Mike calling from a different phone because I'd blocked his usual number. His voice was different, less accusatory, more tired. Sarah was in jail, he told me. Something about check fraud and identity theft. Mom was beside herself, trying to scrape together bail money. The family was broke from enabling Sarah's addiction and criminal behavior. Could I possibly find it in my heart to help? The irony was perfect. The sister they'd wanted me to save had destroyed them all while I'd built a stable, successful life. I felt sad for Mike, who'd been caught in the middle, but I also felt vindicated. I told him I was sorry, but couldn't help, and I meant both parts of that statement. That summer, I took my first solo vacation to Ireland, the trip I'd planned with money that could have been lost to Sarah's schemes. Dublin was beautiful, green, and ancient, and full of people who didn't know my history or my family's dysfunction. I was just another American tourist, free to be whoever I wanted to be. I hiked the cliffs of Maher and thought about how far I'd come from that snowy morning when Mom's email had threatened to derail my life. I'd chosen myself over family obligation, financial security over emotional manipulation, and the view from those cliffs felt like confirmation that I'd made the right choice. I sent a postcard to Dr. Martinez. Healing has a beautiful view. Returning from Ireland, I felt different, stronger. The trip had been proof that life, without my toxic family, could be rich and fulfilling. I made friends with other travelers, explored ancient castles, learned about my Irish heritage from people who weren't trying to guilt me into anything. Back in Minneapolis, I started dating again. A colleague from another department asked me to coffee, then dinner, then a weekend trip to Duluth. For the first time in years, I was meeting someone without the baggage of family drama, without having to explain why I couldn't afford to help with someone else's crisis. His name was David, and he thought I was funny and smart and successful. He didn't know about Sarah or the $74,500 or the bank account hacking. To him, I was just a woman with her life together, worthy of respect and affection. Fall brought news through mutual friends that Sarah had been sentenced to 2 years in prison for the identity theft and fraud charges. Mom had stopped speaking to most of the extended family, embarrassed by the criminal conviction and angry that no one had bailed Sarah out. Mike reached out one more time, this time to apologize. He'd finally seen Sarah's pattern of manipulation and destruction. He understood now why I'd refused to enable her. He wondered if we could rebuild our relationship, separate from the family chaos. I considered it. Mike had been caught in the middle, manipulated just like I had been. But I also remembered how quickly he turned on me, how easily he believed I was selfish and heartless. Trust, once broken, doesn't repair overnight. I told him I needed more time. The second anniversary of my family exile passed quietly. David and I were planning to move in together, combining our lives and our financial goals. He'd met some of my work friends and hiking buddies, the chosen family I'd built to replace the biological one that had failed me. Sometimes I missed the chaos, the drama, the feeling of being needed, even if it was destructive. But I didn't miss the anxiety, the guilt, the constant threat of financial catastrophe. I didn't miss being valued only for what I could provide rather than who I was. My bank account was healthy, my retirement fund was growing, and my credit score had never been better. These weren't just numbers. They were proof that I'd save myself when no one else would. I got a new therapist when Dr. Martinez retired, someone younger who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. She helped me understand that what my family had done wasn't just manipulation, it was a form of economic abuse, using emotional leverage to access my financial resources. She also helped me see that my guilt wasn't evidence of wrongdoing, it was evidence of conscience. Healthy people feel bad when they disappoint others, even when those others are making unreasonable demands. The fact that I'd struggled with my decision proved I wasn't selfish or heartless. I was just someone who'd learned, later than I should have, that love shouldn't come with a price tag. David proposed on a hiking trail overlooking the Mississippi River, the same river that flows through the city where I'd grown up. But this was a different chapter, a new beginning with someone who loved me without conditions or expectations of financial support. We planned a small wedding, just close friends and David's family. His parents were warm and welcoming, treating me like a daughter from the moment we met. His sister sent me funny memes and asked for decorating advice. This was what healthy family relationships looked like. The contrast was stark and healing. I could be loved without being used. I could be valued without being exploited. Family didn't have to mean financial obligation. 3 years after cutting contact, I learned through a former coworker that Mom had moved to Phoenix to be closer to Sarah, who'd been released early for good behavior. They were living together in a small apartment, both working minimum wage jobs to pay off the debt Sarah had accumulated. Part of me felt sorry for Mom, watching her golden years slip away while she enabled the daughter who destroyed her retirement. But another part of me felt relieved that I wasn't there to watch the continued dysfunction, to be pressured into rescuing people who refused to save themselves. I made my choice 3 years ago, and I'd stick with it. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. My wedding was perfect, small, intimate, filled with people who genuinely cared about our happiness. David's best man gave a speech about finding love later in life, about second chances and choosing joy. I thought about how true those words were, not just about romance, but about family and self-respect. Looking around the room at our chosen family of friends, I realized I hadn't lost anything by cutting ties with my biological family. I'd gained everything: peace, security, self-respect, and the ability to love and be loved without conditions. The woman who'd received that panic-filled email about Sarah's debt felt like a different person, someone I barely recognized. I'd become who I was meant to be once I stopped being who others demanded I should be. 5 years later, I can say with certainty that I made the right choice. David and I own a beautiful home, travel regularly, and have built a life filled with mutual respect and shared goals. I was promoted to department manager, then regional director. My colleagues respect me, my friends enjoy my company, and my husband loves me unconditionally. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd paid Sarah's debt that first time, enabled her destruction, and sacrificed my own security. I'd probably be broke, bitter, and still fielding crisis calls every few months. I'd be married to my family's dysfunction instead of to a man who values my happiness. The guilt faded years ago, replaced by gratitude for the strength I found when I needed it most. Choosing myself wasn't selfish, it was survival. I keep that first email from Mom in a folder labeled "Never Again." Sometimes I read it to remember how close I came to destroying my own life for people who saw me as a solution rather than a person. The dollar amount, $74, $500, seems almost quaint now compared to what I've built by protecting that money and my future. Last month, I got a friend request on Facebook from a profile I didn't recognize. The bio mentioned Minneapolis and Phoenix, and something about the eyes in the profile picture looked familiar. Sarah, probably reaching out under a fake name to test whether I'd softened over the years. I deleted the request without a second thought. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I learned it well. Sometimes, to save yourself, you have to cut off family, even when they share your blood, your history, and your last name. I chose myself, and I've never regretted it.